ahead and get started. Let's try to find some seats there. A bunch up in the front. It's not too scary. I'm still very far away from you, so you can come sit up in the front. Some over here as well. Good, welcome. My name is Stephen Minister. I am a philosophy and ethics professor at Augustana. And this semester I'm also teaching the FYS course on global poverty. So, my global poverty folks out there? Where are you? Let's see the hands. A couple of you. All right, yay, global poverty, good. Well, don't repeat that. That doesn't sound so good. There are a number of course titles this semester that don't sound so good, right? There's WTF English, right? Who's WTF? Woo! Remember the WTF? There you go. This is a good crowd, right? Good. There's the grand endeavor of making and taking drugs. Who's making and taking drugs this semester? I mean the class, just the class. Bunch of hands went down there. Good. Okay, yeah. So, with topics like this, we better talk about ethics, right? And so that's what this talk is about today. What is ethics? Why does it matter? And how do we go about doing it? All the spring FYS classes are designed to get you to engage in ethical reflection, to develop your ethical reasoning abilities. So what does that really mean? What is ethical reasoning? What does this look like? Now, I think it's important to talk about this because I think we have a variety of cultural assumptions and stereotypes that can actually get in the way of good ethical reflection. And so I want to start today by talking about a couple things ethics is not. So the first thing that ethics is not moralizing, right? Sometimes when you think about ethics, you might picture somebody like this, right? Finger-waving, know-it-all, who says you always have to follow the rules and you should never have any fun, right? Well, you'll be glad to know that this is not how we think of ethics at Augustana. I like having fun. I don't want to be this guy. Moralizing is condescending and unenlightening, and as such, it's not educational, right? So this is not what your classes are going to do this semester. That's not what ethics is. Here's the second thing ethics is not. Ethics is not simply ethical issues, right? Sometimes when we think of ethics, we think, we go through our normal life, and then every now and then we encounter some controversial, hot-button ethical debate, right? Like same-sex marriage or the death penalty. And then we pull out our values, and we apply them, and we make a judgment, and then we go back to living normal life, right? But that view of ethics is too narrow, because everything you do expresses values, right? The fact that you came to class today expresses values. The fact that you're here pursuing a college degree expresses values. How you spend your free time expresses values. All of those things reflect what matters to you, what's important to you, the values you have. Everything you do, every decision you make reflects those values. But the thing is, most of the time we don't take the time to stop and reflect on those values, right? We make decisions based on our past habits, based on what people tell us, based on what we think we're supposed to be doing. And so we don't actually take time to stop and reflect on those values. And so that's what ethics is. Fundamentally, ethics is just simply reflecting on our lives, thinking about what really matters to us, what's really important. What do you want out of life? What kind of life do you want to lead? And so this semester there are 3 questions that we want you to think about. The first is, what are your core values? In the fall you heard some about Augustana's core values, right? This semester we want you to think about what are your core values, what really matters to you, and how does your life reflect or not reflect those core values. So that's the first question. Second, who will you become? Right? Who are you now, and who do you want to become? What kind of person do you want to become? Right? And how are you going to get there? And finally, how will you make a difference? How will you make a difference here at Augie? How will you make a difference in the lives of your friends and family? How will you make a difference in your society or even in the world? At Augie, these are important questions. And for us, these are not just questions of ethics, they're questions of what we call vocation. And at Augie, vocation doesn't just mean your career, it means your calling. What it is you're called to in life. Right? And we think you're called to more than just a career, you're called to enter to learn and to leave to serve. Right? You're called to follow your passions in ways that will make an impact on other people. Right? Hopefully a positive impact. So we want you to think about these things. At Augie, our education will help you get a job, but we want it to also help you make a difference. We want you to learn how to do things, but we also want you to learn which things are worth doing. We want to support what you want to become, but we also want to support who you want to become. And so the FYS classes this semester, including the plenaries and the journals, are designed to help you think through these issues. So this is really what ethics is. Now, why do ethics? Well, hopefully one of the reasons to do ethics is because these things matter to you. It matters to us who we become and the impact we have on other people. But again, I think there are some assumptions that can get in the way of us actually engaging in ethical reflection. Right? And so there are 3 assumptions I want to talk about. The first one is this: I've got it all figured out already, right? Now, I assume you all are probably decent, good people who generally know how to get along with others. You wouldn't have gotten this far in life if you didn't have those things figured out. Some of you even know what you're going to major in and have some ideas about what you want to do after graduation, and that's great. And so it might be easy to think, well, you really basically have it all figured out. There was a book that was published in the late 80s, became a bestseller, and the title was Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And the idea of the book was that life is really not that complicated. There's some basic, simple rules that are really the important things, and they're the rules we teach to 5-year-olds. Right? Things like, don't hit people, share, hold hands and stick together, flush. Right? That's a good one for life in the dorms, right? Please, flush, right? And so I think there's a grain of truth here, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in life and our pursuits and daily activities that we forget about these basic ideas that really are good and important ideas. But I think those basic ideas are not quite enough. Because life is messy. Life gets complicated. Sometimes we encounter issues or situations where those simple rules don't answer all the questions that we have, right? So take this rule, for example. Thou shalt not kill. This is a good rule. I like this rule. It's probably hard to tell from where you're sitting, but I actually don't work out that much. So I am in favor of this rule. This is a good one. And I hope you're in favor of it too, especially those of you who are in my class, right? But there are times when this rule isn't enough, right? I mean, unless you're an absolute pacifist, unless you think violence is always wrong, you probably allow exceptions to this rule. What about cases of self-defense? Or the death penalty? Or euthanasia? Right? People ending their life if they're terminally ill and in pain. Or what about killing in war? Is that okay? And if so, which wars? When is war justified? Or what about letting die? Right? If we have the power to save people from dying, but we don't, we let them die, is that wrong? That's a question that my students in global poverty will have to think about this semester. Right? So simple rules like thou shalt not kill may be perfectly good rules, but they're only the beginning. And we need to go farther. We need to think more deeply, because the reality is this: life is complicated. And none of us have it all figured out. And that's okay. I've been teaching ethics for 14 years. You'd think I'd have it figured out by now. But I don't. Right? It's okay to not have it figured out. I've talked with most of your professors, and don't tell them this, but I don't think they have it all figured out either. Okay? So it's okay to be in process. We're all in process. We're all still learning. And we're here to do that together. Right? Okay. So none of us have it all figured out. That's the first assumption that can get in the way of good ethical reflection. Here's the second assumption that can get in the way of ethical reflection. People are really just selfish. Maybe you've heard somebody say this, this ethics stuff, it's a waste of time. People are just selfish. You know, at the end of the day, people are just going to do whatever is in their self-interest. So this ethics stuff really doesn't matter. Now again, there's a grain of truth here. People are sometimes selfish, for sure, without a doubt. Sometimes, actually, people are even selfish when they're pretending to be ethical. Right? Have you seen that? Right? Somebody does something that looks good, but you know they're doing it for selfish motives. I remember when I was in college, I had some friends who would all of a sudden become like extra nice and extra generous and extra thoughtful when that special someone was around. Right? You know what I'm talking about? People still do this? This still happen? I see some head nods. Okay, yeah. I mean, I probably did this as well. It's just easier to see in other people than in myself. But, okay, so definitely people are selfish, right? Sometimes. Self-interest is a very powerful motivator for humans, and we should never forget that when we're doing ethics. But humans are complicated. The fact that sometimes we're selfish doesn't mean that we're always selfish, right? Self-interest is a powerful motivator, but there are other powerful motivators for us as humans as well, right? So for example, empathy. Right? Empathy is feeling what others are feeling, right? It's that spark of joy you feel when you look at a happy, smiling baby. Doesn't that just get you? It's that pang of concern you feel when you look at a baby that's sad and there's big tears welling up in her eyes. That's empathy. Other people affect us. Other people matter to us, often whether we want them to or not. And this is deeply rooted in us as humans. It's deeply rooted in our nature. So deep, in fact, that some studies suggest that we actually empathize people even unconsciously. There's a great study where they had people look at a computer screen, and the researchers would very quickly flash an image of a human face smiling or frowning on the computer screen. And they flashed them so fast that the people were not even consciously aware that anything had happened. Right? They would flash one of these pictures, and then they would ask the people, did anything change? People would say, no, nothing changed on the computer. I didn't see anything. And while they were doing this, they had electrodes hooked up to the people's faces to measure their muscle activity. Right? And what they found is that when they would flash a smiling face, people's smiley muscles were activated. Smiley muscles probably isn't the technical term, but you understand what I'm saying, right? And when they would flash the frowning face, frowning muscles were activated. Isn't that incredible? Well, people were not even consciously aware of seeing anything, and yet at a physiological level they were having this empathetic mirroring response. Isn't that amazing? That's how deeply rooted empathy is in humans. And it's not just humans either. Actually, there's a variety of mammals that demonstrate really high levels of empathy. There's a classic experiment from the 60s where they took two monkeys and put them in cages next to each other. And one of the monkeys, when it pushed the food lever in its cage to get food, it would also administer a powerful electrical shock to the monkey in the next cage. Right? It's terrible, right? You could never do this nowadays, right? This is back in the 60s. People were very unethical back then. So anyway, so they did this experiment, and monkeys are very smart. So it only took them pushing the lever once or twice, and they figured out that this lever was causing shocks to the next monkey. Right? And then the researchers wanted to see what will happen. Right? What will the monkeys do when they get hungry? Will they push the lever? You can think about this for yourself. What if this was you? What if every time you ate, a powerful electrical shock was administered to your roommate? Well, don't say what would happen actually. Pick it up. Monkeys. Let's think about the monkeys. So what would the monkeys do, right? So here's what the researchers found, was that the monkeys would go days without eating so as not to shock the other monkey, right? And in fact, in the study, one monkey went 12 days without eating so as not to shock the other monkey. Isn't that incredible? 12 days. I think that must have been like the Jesus monkey or something. Right? It's amazing, right? Okay, so the world is not all selfishness and self-interest, right? Empathy is deeply rooted in us and can powerfully motivate us to help others, right? So we're not just selfish. In fact, the reality is this. We care about ourselves and we care about other people. We want to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that, wanting to be happy, wanting your own personal happiness. But we also want to be good and kind and just. Life would be easier if we were just selfish. There'd only be one thing to think about, whatever I want, and I just try to get it. It's precisely because we care about so many people, we care about so many values, that life gets difficult, that life gets complicated, that we need ethical reflection and ethical reasoning. Right? Okay, so selfishness, that was the second assumption that can get in the way of ethical reasoning. Here's the third. It's all relative, right? We look around the world, and even around American society, and we see a lot of ethical disagreement. Right? And so it's easy to conclude that, well, maybe there's just no right answers, it's just all opinions, any opinion is as good as any other, my opinion is just as good as yours, and I'm entitled to my opinion. So maybe we should just stop talking and not get involved in these pointless, unending debates. Right? So again, I think there's a grain of truth here. I think the grain of truth here is actually a really powerful idea, and that's the idea that thoughtful, intelligent, honest people disagree. Right? And once we realize that, it should make us realize a couple things. One, just because you're a thoughtful, intelligent, honest person doesn't mean you're always right. And that should inculcate a sense of humility in us. That we shouldn't assume that we're always right and those who disagree with us are always wrong. And in fact, we need to learn to accept people with a variety of different views. So I think those are important and powerful lessons, right? I'm a fan of humility and of tolerance. I think these are good things. But relativism actually goes a step farther and says, not just that we should have humility and some range of tolerance, but that there actually are no right answers, there really are no right and wrong. Even simple moral rules like thou shalt not kill, it's just an opinion. If you have a different opinion, you're entitled to that, so be it. So relativism is actually really quite a radical view. It's a view that the vast majority of philosophers think is theoretically problematic, that's sort of theoretically incoherent. I don't really want to get into that, in part because I think it's actually quite complicated, and in part because my concern about relativism really isn't theoretical, it's practical. And the problem, I think, is that practically speaking, relativism is useless. Relativism doesn't help us answer the very real ethical questions that we confront in life. Who do I want to be? Well, you know, minister, it's all relative. There's no right answer. It's just opinion, so it doesn't really matter. But it does matter. It matters to me. It matters to a bunch of other people around me. Should South Dakota have the death penalty? Well, you know, South Dakota has the death penalty, Minnesota doesn't. It's all relative. There's no right answer. It doesn't matter. Oh, but it does matter. Right? Do we want to be the sort of community that executes people or not? It's a real question for us, right? And the idea that things are just relative, don't make those questions go away. It doesn't help us solve any of those problems. We still need to think about them. We still need to think about them together. So my concern with relativism isn't that it's theoretically true or not. I mean, even if it is theoretically true, it's just not practically helpful. We still need to engage in ethical reflection, right? So the reality is this. You still have to decide how to live, right? And we still have to figure out how to live together, even amidst our differences. And so we need to talk. We need to think. We need to reason together. Right? And that's what ethical reflection should do. Okay, so that's why we need ethical reflection. How do we go about doing this ethical reflection? What does this look like? Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of the models that we have of debate or discussion are really not good examples of ethical reflection. So take this for example. About the last place you would want to look for good, thoughtful, ethical reflection are cable news shows or political debates, right? These people are really just interested in scoring points, shouting down the opposition, showing why they're right and everyone else is wrong, and probably also stupid and dishonest, right? It's not thoughtful, it's not reflective, it's not helpful. Please do not let your class become a cable news show. Okay? Here's another example. That's not a good example of ethical reflection. That's internet comment sections. Right? Internet comment sections actually, I think, are a very good example often of unethical unreflection. Right? There's not actually any thoughtfulness about the issue at hand. It's just simply personal criticisms and attacks of other people. Right? Unethical unreflection. Do not let your class become an internet comment section. So instead, we need a different model for what ethical reflection and ethical reasoning looks like. And so here's what I propose. When I think of ethical reasoning, I think this is what it should be. It should be creative, communal inquiry. So it should be an inquiry. In an inquiry, you don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know the answers ahead of time, right? In a debate, people come in, they know the answers ahead of time, they know what they're going to be arguing for, and they just come up with whatever reasons sound good to support their position, right? But in inquiry, you start with questions, not with answers. You don't know where things are going to go. You have to learn. You have to build understanding. You want to embrace complexity. You don't want to simplify things down to sound bites and oversimplified little rules. You want to understand things in their complexity. In a debate, the goal is to win. In an inquiry, the goal is to learn. Ethical reasoning should be about learning. And as we learn, as we come to a better understanding, our ethical views deepen. And sometimes they shift. So we want ethical reasoning to be an inquiry. We also want it to be a communal inquiry. Now, I think it's good to do your own personal ethical reflection. I encourage you to do that. The journal assignments this semester will help you do that. So that's a good thing. But inquiry always goes deeper when we do it with other people. Right? Because other people bring different ideas, different perspective, different life experiences from which we can learn. Right? And so in inquiry, we need to do it together. We need it to be communal. And we need to learn to really listen to other people. Not just to hear the words coming out of other people's mouths, but to understand where they're coming from. Your colleagues here are all thoughtful, decent people. There are good reasons why they think the way they do. There are life experiences that inform their perspectives. Try to understand that. Try to understand that especially when you disagree with them. That's what ethical reasoning should look like. So communal inquiry takes listening, but it also takes speaking up. Because after all, you have ideas, you have perspective, you have life experience from which the rest of us can learn. And so we need you to share that. We need you to speak up, to share your ideas and your life experience, especially when you disagree. Now, I know that's difficult. It can be hard to do. But we can disagree without being disagreeable. And we need disagreement. Disagreement is good. Disagreement works. Right? Disagreement is what pushes us to think more deeply. What do you call a community where no one disagrees? A cult. Don't let your class become a cult. No cults this semester, right? Speak up. Disagree. So that's communal inquiry. But ethical reasoning should also be creative. And I think this really goes against some of the stereotypes of ethics. Usually creativity and ethics, we think, oh, that's bad. You shouldn't have creative ethics, right? But I think creativity is important because when we really listen to other people, we begin to see complexity. We begin to recognize that life is complicated. That on almost any issue there are multiple perspectives, multiple values and interests at play. And when we recognize that, that pushes us beyond the very easy black and white, I'm right, you're wrong, pro this, anti that sort of moralizing that you see on cable news shows and internet comment sections. Right? So we want to go beyond that to be creative. Complexity and uncertainty open the possibility for creativity. We need creativity. We need creative problem solving if we're going to figure out how to get along together. So creative communal inquiry. That's what ethical reasoning should look like. That's what you should be practicing this semester. It's not easy. It's difficult. Creative communal inquiry does not guarantee that you will come to an agreement. You probably won't. Thoughtful ethical reasoning does not always lead to an agreement, but it can lead to deeper understanding. And there's something valuable simply about that. But if we're going to get there, we have to go beyond moralizing. We have to go beyond simplistic rules. We have to cultivate virtues like thoughtfulness, humility, empathy, creativity, the ability to listen, and the ability to speak up. Those are difficult things. It's not easy. It's going to take practice. It's going to take more than a semester of practice. But those are the things that we value here at Augustana. That's the sort of community we want to be. That's the sort of difference that we want to make in the world. I hope you'll make it with us. Thank you so much for coming. You should head back to your classrooms. Be sure to swipe your ID if you didn't already. Have a great semester.